You have to imagine a ship so powerful it could bring an entire nation to its knees. For me, the Bismarck was the Death Star. It was a kind of mechanized warfare that hopefully will never exist again.
A state-of-the-art underwater drone was dispatched to the wreck of the Bismarck, expecting to film a historical relic.
It was this monstrous piece of steel that held together no matter what the British could throw at it, and when it finally sank, it became a legend.
But what it found was a scene that defied all logic. The most powerful battleship of its era, sitting almost perfectly upright in the abyss, held a secret. The damage seen by the drone's cameras didn't match the historical records of the final battle. It pointed to something else, something far more sinister that happened in the ship's last moments. This discovery didn't just solve a mystery, it created a brand new one that still haunts us today. The sunken behemoth's secret. The thing nobody tells you about the deep ocean is the sheer, hostile pressure. At that depth, the water exerts a force of over 6,000 pounds per square inch. It's a pressure that can crush a modern submarine like a soda can. This is the world Ballard's team was trying to pierce. Their primary tool was a revolutionary piece of tech called Argo, a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, that was more like a deep-sea bloodhound. It was a 12-foot-long steel sled packed with high-resolution cameras, sonar, and lights powerful enough to illuminate the eternal night of the abyss. For days, the research vessel Connor towed Argo back and forth in a meticulous grid pattern, a process called mowing the lawn. The team stared at grainy monitors for hours on end, waiting for a sign, any sign, of the lost battleship. You see, the official records from the British Admiralty gave an approximate location, but approximate in the vastness of the Atlantic is a scary word. Ballard knew that the ship could be anywhere within a 150 square mile search box. After days of finding nothing but mud and the occasional deep-sea creature, the mood on the Nore was tense. Then, on June 8, 1989, it happened. An unmistakable shape flickered onto the screen. It was debris. Large, twisted pieces of steel that could only have come from a massive warship. The hunt was over. They had found it. What many overlooked in the initial excitement was just how terrifying the first images were. As Argo drifted over the main wreck, a collective gasp went through the control room. The Bismarck was sitting upright on the slope of an extinct underwater volcano, almost as if it had been placed there. This wasn't the shattered, broken heap everyone expected. It was a ghost ship, eerily preserved in the cold, still water. Its massive 820-foot-long hull was largely in one piece. The structural integrity was, to be blunt, impossible. It defied everything they thought they knew about how a ship of this size meets its end. The ship had clearly slid for over a mile down the volcanic slope after hitting the bottom, yet it remained dignified and menacing, even in its demise. But there was something wrong. The stern of the ship was just gone. It had been ripped clean off, a shocking wound on the otherwise intact behemoth. And the damage to the rest of the ship didn't add up. Ballard's team immediately launched Alvin, a 3-person submersible, for a closer look. Descending for hours into the crushing black, they were the first humans to lay eyes on the Bismarck since its final, desperate battle. The superstructure, where the command towers and bridges were, was shredded. It was a chaotic mess of jagged holes from heavy British shells. But as they examined the main hull, the story changed. The thickest part of the ship's armor, a nearly 13-inch thick belt of steel designed to stop any shell, was almost untouched. They counted only 8 major holes above the waterline. Below it, nothing. No gaping torpedo wounds, no catastrophic breaches. The armored heart of the beast was intact. How could a ship so heavily bombarded, so relentlessly attacked, sink without its main defenses being broken? This discovery didn't provide answers. It just created a more profound and disturbing question. The ship that was supposed to be obliterated was sitting there, defiant. What really sent it to the bottom? The camera that saw too much. Ballard's expedition opened the door, but it took more than a decade for technology to catch up to the mystery. In 2002, filmmaker and deep-sea explorer James Cameron, a man known for his obsession with detail, led a new expedition. This wasn't just about looking at the outside of the wreck. Cameron wanted to go inside. He brought with him a fleet of advanced technology that made Ballard's initial setup look ancient. His primary tools were two Russian-built Mir submersibles and a pair of small, nimble ROVs, nicknamed bots. These bots were small enough to navigate the twisted, corroded passageways of the sunken battleship, acting as the team's eyes in places no human could ever go. The mission was to perform a complete forensic analysis of the wreck. But not all things are what they seem, and this deep-sea crime scene was far more complex than anyone imagined. As the bots penetrated the dark interior of the Bismarck, they beamed back images that were nothing short of haunting. They glided through flooded corridors, past crew quarters where personal effects still lay scattered, and into the massive engine rooms. It was a journey into a tomb. What they captured terrified the world because it brought a human element to the cold steel wreck. This wasn't just a ship. It was the final resting place for over 2,000 men. What many overlooked was the technical precision of Cameron's investigation. His team meticulously measured the shell damage. They confirmed that while the British battleships Rodney and King George V had fired over 700 large-caliber shells, they found evidence of only 2 that had fully penetrated the main 12.6-inch armor belt. 2. It was an astonishing testament to the ship's construction. The pride of the German Navy had effectively shrugged off the best the Royal Navy could throw at it. The drone footage confirmed it. The outer armor was not the reason the Bismarck sank. The bots revealed something else, however. They found long, peeling tears in the hull plating below the armor belt. At first glance, this looked like the smoking gun, the torpedo damage everyone was looking for. But the thing is, the damage wasn't consistent with an explosion. Instead, the tears were characteristic of a massive impact and stress. Cameron's team concluded these gashes were caused when the 50,000-ton battleship slammed into the seafloor and then slid for thousands of feet down the side of the volcano. The mountain had done more damage to the hull than the British torpedoes. The most shocking discovery came from inside. The drones showed that the decks beneath the main armored deck had been compressed downwards by 10 to 13 feet. This was a clear sign that the ship had flooded from the inside out. The sheer weight of the water filling the lower compartments had crushed the internal structure as the ship plunged into the abyss. This evidence pointed away from external battle damage and towards something else, something the German survivors had claimed all along. Was it possible the Bismarck hadn't been sunk by the enemy at all? The drone footage was now painting a picture of a ship that was externally tough, but internally collapsing. 9 days of terror. To understand what the drones found, you have to understand the sheer panic the Bismarck caused. Commissioned in August 1940, she was the most powerful warship afloat. She was faster, bigger, and more heavily armed than anything the British had. In May of 1941, she slipped out into the Atlantic on her first and only mission, codenamed Operation Rheinübung. Her goal was simple and brutal: to sever the lifeline of supply convoys from the United States to Britain. If she succeeded, the war would be lost for the Allies. She was, to put it mildly, a monster loose in the Atlantic. On May 24th, the nightmare became real. The Bismarck, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, encountered the pride of the Royal Navy, the battlecruiser HMS Hood, and the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales. In a battle lasting only minutes, the Bismarck did the unthinkable. A salvo of its 15-inch shells pierced the Hood's deck armor and detonated its rear ammunition magazines. The Hood exploded in a catastrophic fireball, broke in two, and sank in less than 3 minutes. Of her 1,418 crewmen, only 3 survived. The world was stunned. The mighty Hood was gone. The Bismarck had just announced its arrival on the world stage in the most terrifying way possible. What followed was one of an intense manhunt in naval history. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill issued a simple, chilling order: sink the Bismarck. Every available ship in the British home fleet was diverted to hunt it down, but the Bismarck was wounded. A hit from the Prince of Wales had damaged a forward fuel tank, forcing it to leak oil and reducing its top speed. The German admiral aboard, Günther Lütjens, made a fateful decision. he would head for the safety of a port in occupied France. For a terrifying 24 hours, the Bismarck gave its pursuers the slip and vanished into the vastness of the ocean. The thing nobody tells you is how close the Bismarck came to escaping. It was a single rickety biplane that sealed its fate. On May 26th, a Catalina flying boat spotted the oil slick trailing the German battleship. The hunters knew where their prey was. The aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal launched its attack planes, a squadron of obsolete swordfish biplanes. These planes were so slow and fragile they were nicknamed string bags. But they were the only weapon the British had. In a daring, low-level attack in foul weather, they launched their torpedoes. One of those torpedoes struck the Bismarck's stern and jammed its rudders. This was the fatal blow. The mighty battleship was now stuck turning in circles, a helpless giant. The British fleet closed in for the final encounter. On the morning of May 27th, the battleships Rodney and King George V opened fire. For nearly 2 hours, they pummeled the Bismarck at point-blank range, turning its upper decks into a burning slaughterhouse. But still, it would not sink. Its flags were still flying. It was a floating wreck, on fire from bow to stern, but its hull remained buoyant. Why wouldn't it go down? The answer lay not in the British onslaught, but in orders whispered on the dying ship itself, the truth on the seafloor. So, here we are, looking at the evidence from the deep. On one hand, you have the historical record, a relentless British assault that left the Bismarck a burning wreck. On the other, you have the shocking drone footage showing an armored hull that was largely unbreached by the attack. Many people are still crazy about this debate. Did the British really sink the Bismarck, or did the Germans do it themselves? Let's talk directly about this, looking at what the drones told us. The German survivors, including high-ranking officers, have always been consistent. They claimed that with the ship crippled and unable to fight, the order was given to scuttle it, to deliberately sink it, to prevent it from being captured by the enemy. They testified that engineers opened internal watertight doors and planted demolition charges with 9-minute fuses in the engine rooms. They were determined that their ship would not become a British war prize. For decades, this was dismissed by many as a prideful excuse. But the drone footage changes everything. You see, the intact outer armor belt directly supports the scuttling theory. The ship wasn't ripped open from the outside. The internal collapse of the decks, seen by Cameron's bots, is exactly what you would expect if the ship was flooded systematically from within. It filled up like a bathtub, the immense weight of the water causing it to founder and eventually sink. The British bombardment certainly turned the ship into a non-functional wreck and made its end inevitable. They destroyed its ability to fight, to move, to communicate. But the final act, the one that sent it on its 3-mile plunge to the seafloor, seems to have been an inside job. So, is the legend really true? For decades, the story of the Bismarck's final moments was a battle of narratives, a fierce debate between historical accounts. Were the British Royal Navy's relentless attacks the sole reason for its sinking, or was it an act of defiance by its own crew? The thing is, the answer isn't a simple yes or no. The chilling evidence, brought back from the crushing darkness of the abyss, reveals a far more complex truth. Both sides are right. The Bismarck's fate was a brutal 2-act tragedy. Act 1 belonged to the British. Their relentless pursuit and overwhelming firepower effectively neutralized the fearsome warship, turning it into a floating wreck. The torpedo that crippled its rudders was the real turning point, a fatal blow that left the mighty vessel circling helplessly in the unforgiving Atlantic. After that moment, the Bismarck was doomed, a sitting duck awaiting the inevitable. Act 2 was the German crew's final desperate decision. With their ship dead in the water and thousands of explosive shells raining down upon them, they chose to hasten the end. Rather than let their prized battleship fall into enemy hands as a trophy, they initiated scuttling procedures. It was a final act of defiance from a crew that knew they were just moments away from their watery graves. Modern drone evidence confirms this harrowing tale. The underwater footage suggests that without the scuttling, the Bismarck might have remained a burning, helpless hulk for hours more, but it was already lost. The scuttling was the crew's last stand, a way to reclaim control in their final moments. Was the Bismarck's fate a necessary act of war or a tragic loss of life? Let us know below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden history.